Have you ever written non-compliant in a session note without really pausing to ask, non-compliant with what? And more importantly, why? In this episode, we're digging into one of the most overused and often misunderstood labels in ABA, non-compliance. Is it truly a behavior that needs changing, or is it a reflection of our own expectations and biases?
Hi, I'm Shira.
And I'm Shayna.
We are behavior analysts who create weekly content about how to teach kids with autism so that they make real progress. And we create shareable resources to make your job just a little easier. Today's topic is all about rethinking non-compliance. And if you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on new video releases.
So, interestingly enough, my daughter was going to a special event. She was graduating, and she has this really nice dress that she wanted to wear. And I got her some shoes. So, she had these dress shoes to go with the dress. And the night before the event, she had kind of a minor, meltdown, for lack of a better word, because she didn't want to wear the dress shoes. She wanted to wear running shoes with her dress. She said, a few of her other friends were wearing running shoes. They'd be more comfortable. But I bought the dress shoes specifically for this event, and they looked great with the dress. Well, come on, just wear the dress shoes. Now, I mean, it's kind of a silly story, but really I was like, okay, this is kind of non-compliance. Like I literally bought these shoes. She should be wearing these shoes with the dress. Wear the shoes with the dress. You'll look good. Anyway, with that being said, she woke up the next day and she put running shoes on and she left the house without me seeing them until, she texted me a picture later and she had her running shoes on. Deep breaths. Was she being non-compliant or was she just really asserting her independence? I kind of think it's cool. She was asserting her independence and she, was comfortable. I kind of am jealous that she got to wear her running shoes with a dress, right? Because I kind of want to do the same thing sometimes.
So, what do we mean by non-compliance? It's kind of become a bit of a catch-all in ABA, and it had been traditionally used for many, many years to refer to students or clients who aren't really doing what we expect them to do, aren't following instructions. We use non-compliance, we talk about our own children often. There's a couple issues with it. One of them is that often non-compliance isn't even a behavior, right? We talk about behaviors being things that are measurable and observable, and sometimes not doing something is actually not a behavior. So then we can dig a little bit deeper and say, like, okay, well, what was the actual problem with the non-compliance? Was it that there was a meltdown, a behavior, an aggressive episode? Like, then we could talk about that. But non-compliance in and of itself may not be the thing that is so much of an issue. Often it comes more from the perspective of the adult having an issue with the non-compliance and it being a little more reflective of a control and power struggle.
And I think, when you first start ABA programs in general, we always look and we always say, well, we've got to gain instructional control when we first start working with a student. And, 10, 20 years ago, instructional control was really meant, to mean, oh, that first then concept of, okay, well, first we get, the child to do something for us and then, they get some kind of reinforcement. But that whole quote unquote instructional control, I feel uncomfortable saying that now because I don't want to gain dominance over somebody. I don't want them to do something because they're scared of me. And I think this whole idea of instructional control and then the non-compliance piece of it, they're non-compliant because they're not following exactly what we said. Like our whole goal, and we've said this from day one, we don't want to make kids into robots. And, I feel like, talking about non-compliance, instructional control, we really are saying, no, you need to do what I say. What was that Lincoln, right? Like walk softly, but carry a big stick. Like I can't stand that. And we need to make sure that in ABA, we need to be a lot more compassionate. There's my spiel and there's my preachiness there.
It's true. We talk a lot about cooperation over compliance. We have a whole fact series on this, so go check that out. The link is in the show notes. But the reason that we talk about that is because we want to create a relationship where our students are cooperating and not just complying. Often this perspective of control and compliance comes from a little bit of a bias, right? We have an agenda, or the teacher has something that needs to get done, and this child might be getting in the way of that agenda. And I think that if we're seeing these kind of behaviors, again, define what non-compliance is actually looking like, ask like first, is this even a problem? And it might not be a problem if like they're not finishing their worksheet, like that's okay. Or if they're needing a little bit, a couple more breaks, that's also okay. Because we want to look at it as what are they trying to tell us, right? Any behavior is trying to tell us something. It could be a skill that they don't have. So this is a can't do. Maybe the expectations are too high and they just don't have the skills to comply. And so we look at it as, okay, how can we teach them the skills? Or is this a won't do? Like, is this a motivation issue? And then we look at things like relationship and cooperation, reinforcement, motivation, all of those pieces. There's always a why behind any behavior. So we as the adult, instead of going into a power struggle, have to think about why might this be happening? What is this the other perspective? What is the student thinking and feeling? Maybe what I'm asking is too hard. And so it's does take a lot of awareness as the adult, but thinking about like why is this important? Why is this child struggling? So many questions that we can ask ourselves.
We teach or we talk about teaching manding requesting, and manding requesting to me gets into self-advocacy. And so how do you say on one hand, okay, I'm going to teach manding and I'm going to get requesting really high, but yet on the other hand you say, well, they're self-advocating, but I'm going to call it non-compliance. It to me doesn't make sense. It's such a dichotomy. So we need to look and go, okay, well, the self-advocacy we actually are teaching and we think it's a really great thing. So making sure that we can reinforce that as often as possible. Now, with that being said, we need to make sure as adults, it's still our job to set boundaries. So, like I said in the beginning, my daughter wanted to wear running shoes with her dress instead of dress shoes. Big deal. Like in the grand scheme of things, big deal. Now, if she was asking to wear something that was completely inappropriate, guess what? That would have been a bigger deal. And if she snuck out of the house wearing something completely inappropriate, that would have been a major deal. Now, what we need though is we need to go, okay, so like Shira said, the non-compliance, is it a can't do? Is it a won't do? But also that looking and saying, okay, so it's not a can't do. They do have these skills. It may be a won't do. Let's, make sure that we can set some of those boundaries though and say like you have to do sometimes we have to do things we don't like and here's why and set those boundaries with kindness.
Yeah, because then creating boundaries and building cooperation is also a skill, and that's going to come from a place of relationship and trust. So if our child is breaking one of the boundaries, then you still have the choice of, okay, I could engage in this power struggle to like assert this boundary, depending on how unsafe it is. But it could also be like, well, let's look back again into the relationship and think about why is my client, student, child not respecting this boundary? And is it still a relationship issue? I mean, you still want to keep them safe, obviously, and you have to assert certain boundaries. But we can still, as the adult, ask ourselves those questions. Where is this coming from?
So, respecting that refusal of like, no, I'm not doing that is definitely a great thing. Like, I really do think that that's self-advocacy skills. But like I said, setting those boundaries with kindness. So teaching, students to tolerate no, like, sorry, you've got to do that, right? And be able to tolerate that denial, right? Or at least tolerate, like, not right now. So you can do this, but not right now. Or you can't do this, but here's when you can do this. So, when I say it's time to stop the iPad because we've got to do this instead, and the student has a meltdown, I mean, that's an issue. Is it non-compliance? No, we need to teach them to self-advocate and say, I need one more minute. And then we need to teach them, we need to respect that one more minute, but then we need to teach them to actually get off the iPad after it's been one more minute, or it's been like 3 more minutes and it's time to get off the iPad now and come back. But here's when you can have the iPad again.
And we also need to be aware of the cultural biases that exist with the label of noncompliance. Noncompliance or refusing to do things, advocacy, those look different in every culture. Some cultures, children are not allowed to say no to adults. They're not allowed to really, argue, and that might seem disrespectful. Some children are not supposed to make eye contact. Like that could be a big cultural influence on how we define compliance, how we talk about teaching goals, because if a certain culture or organization or family doesn't want their children to disrespectfully say no to an adult, then we need to be aware of that, and we can teach advocacy in a way that is sensitive to that culture. We can teach, different ways to still get their needs met and respect the rules of that culture.
And we do this usually in our intake process. We also do this through continued conversations with clients. When I'm talking to the stakeholders, I am, constantly asking them, what are your goals? Sure, we've done the assessment and, we've said, these are the goals based on the assessment. These are the goals based on observation. These are the goals based on our experience, but we do need to make sure that we're taking into account families' goals and families' values as well. So continue to ask yourself during that intake process, during continued conversations with the families, what is the most important to you? What are your goals? What do you want to do at this point in time? If the family comes to you and says, I need you to solve this non-compliance issue, you can talk to them about what do they specifically mean by non-compliance and defining that more.
And ask them. We have, some families who have very high expectations for some of their children, which is great. They expect them to be doing everything that they're supposed to be doing 100% of the time and get no leeway. And while it's great to have high expectations, we want to respect the value of that family. We may have to define further what that means. Your child may need a couple more, gross motor breaks. They may need a little bit more of a modified program or curriculum, but we can still do that being aligned with the values of that family. And I think one of the things that helps is really defining some of those terms. What does it mean to, be non-compliant? What does it mean to keep up with the class? What does it mean to do the work? And talk about what would be meaningful for the family and what would be also realistic.
We do that. We can use the, acceptance and commitment therapy. We've got an ACT values matrix that we sometimes fulfill with the client or with a stakeholder. Sometimes we do an ACT values matrix with clients as well, depending on their language level, really defining and clarifying what values are driving the program. We also, look at our treatment plans on a regular basis to make sure that we're trying to, audit our language in those treatment plans and making sure that, we're trying to, eliminate some of that unintended bias, get rid of those words, meaning non-compliance, look at some other words that we use and really define what they mean so that it's clear for everyone.
And a lot of, staff training with anybody who's working with this learner, there is a lot of, traditional old biases around compliance that students and children should be showing in certain areas and organizations and cultures and schools. And so really training staff on what they need to know and an awareness of what non-compliance is, why it may not be the best way to describe a learner, why we don't, encourage certain consequences based on non-compliance. There's a lot of education around that we definitely encourage you to do with, parents, caregivers, teachers, and everyone.
So suggestions for the teaching plan or for the treatment plan, replacing the word non-compliant with more descriptive, objective language.
Using observable terms. So if it is non-compliant, then you could say, like, how did that look? And it could be something like, did not follow the instruction within 10 seconds.
We can emphasize and, do skill building, communication, choice making, flexibility, really get at that self-advocacy in the treatment plan.
And then in your supervision, really encourage that reflection and awareness. Like, is this just bothering me as the adult? And that comes from a place of like power or control, or is this really an issue? For more information on rethinking compliance, click the link on or around this video or in the description to join our Cooperation Over Compliance video series. We also encourage you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos and leave a like and comment below if you have further questions.